And yeah, thanks for sharing, Brett. Warmer summer is creating a lot of envy here. We're just starting our winter, but I'm sure you're having a good time down there in Cape Town. It's time that we join again and we can get together again. Awesome. Anybody else wants to share where they're dialing in from? We're here. I'm sitting in Germany at the moment. Team is dialing in from all over the world. I see Rod dialing in from the Philippines, in spirit in Chile. Hi, Shweta from Hamburg. Good to see you. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the birthday wishes. Very much appreciated. Awesome. And Vikas from India. Great to see you. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Then we'll actually start right away. And welcome to the unusual talk here today with Ritesh from Educational Initiatives. As usual, it is an open call, which means you get to see everybody that's participating, get to chat with anybody that's participating. So feel free to make use of that. For now, please do mute yourself if you're on the call, just so we can focus on the conversation with Ritesh and only have a chance to chat later on in the conversation. The agenda is the usual as in our calls. We'll have a chance to have a conversation with Ritesh, and then we'll have a chance also to network. As usual, you don't have to go into the breakouts to network. You can also just stay in the plenary, but really is an opportunity for you to meet like-minded people and people in the ecosystem. And if you're lucky and you get the lucky draw, you'd also be matched with Ritesh then to have a one-on-one conversation with him. I got the chance to know him a couple of months ago when we started this whole program, and I can only tell you it's really worth having a chat with him. That being said, many of you know, if you don't, that we're doing this as part of the Unusual Pioneers program, which is a support program for social entrepreneurs. So that those are employees that are driving change inside of big companies and medium-sized companies as well to turn those businesses into a force for good, use their assets, use their resources to solve some of the most pressing challenges of our time. We had very interesting conversations so far, many more coming up as well. And most interestingly is that obviously we do need more of those social entrepreneurs, those unusual pioneers. We keep on telling that we're all on a trajectory towards hopefully building a economy that is serving society, planet within our planetary boundaries. But for that, we need to build those new roads to get there. We need to have visionary leaders, unusual pioneers that help us to get to a future that can sustain us all as a society and as a planet. And today we have a chance to talk about education, specifically remote education, digital education, and that is something that is obviously super important to the development of societies. And we've just seen that depending on the forecasts you look at, that we've actually just put 7 years of development back into the trash can during COVID. 120 to 150 million people are expected to be or get into poverty due to COVID until this year, which is about the same number that we got out of poverty in the last 7 years of hard and torturous development work. It's another testament that speaks to just the need of vaccine rollout in all of the countries, access to healthcare for everybody, but it also obviously had a massive impact on education with so many students, so many schools closed, so many students having to learn from remote, having to learn from home. And while that may be still possible in countries in Europe, in the US and advanced economies, when you look at other countries, and even India as a well-developed economy, even in India with only 24% of people having access to the internet, and at the same time even less in rural areas, I believe you can see a bit of the issue and the heaviness of the problem that persists during COVID. And unfortunately, a lot of those challenges even more heavy on the shoulders of women and girls. So there is a big need to support the recovery and the work out of COVID around education, around access to services, and pioneers that are actually making that happen. This is why we're so happy to have Ritesh here on the call today. Ritesh joins us from Educational Initiatives, which is an Indian company that was founded just 20 years ago. I believe you have a 20th anniversary this year, right, Ritesh? So that's worth celebrating for sure. And back in the day, founded by IIM graduates, really an edtech company that serves educators by now in over 20 countries, which is quite impressive as I've seen it, and has a couple of products that enable digital learning for students. One is Mindspark, which is really an AI-enabled, data-driven learning platform that builds very customized learning trajectories for students. I wish I've had that. Certainly my teachers would have loved to have that for me. It's a Harvard Business School case study by now. It was featured not once, but twice in The Economist, if I read right. And then it was also awarded the best product by IDA Awards in 2018. And the product itself at the moment is in 300 schools and works with 15,000 teachers and 500,000 students. Another program, though, that's super interesting and that's even more impactful just by the numbers, has been launched in 2004 by Educational Initiatives, which is the large-scale education program. It's a diagnostic assessment of the learning capacities of students with really intelligent e-learning based on the products that EI is providing, and is reaching 12 million underprivileged kids around the world. And I think the recent partnership is with Amazon for Amazon Wonder Girls, which really looks at tech education for 50,000 girls in about 100 schools in India as well. So I'm really excited to learn more about that and learn more about also Ritesh's journey to lead this initiative. Pranav, who was the previous leader, actually went on to serve as the CEO of Educational Initiatives, which is always a super positive message for us to see that entrepreneurs can not only be the nagging change makers inside of an organization that are knocking on everybody's door in the hope to create more impact, but then also actually are seen as those that are creating long-term strategic value for the company and get to serve in executive roles later on as well. So big shout out to Pranav, and today we would love to introduce Ritesh. But before I do that, I wanted to let you know, those of you that are already starting your entrepreneurial journey, to please take a look at the program at Unusual Pioneers and let us know if you're interested in joining. I think Ritesh can say a few words about whether it's worth it or not. Obviously, I hope it's good news, but we've really had positive feedback from the cohort this year, and we're doing this again in 2022. So if you're interested to join the program and benefit from over 100 mentors, 15 plus sector organizations that work with us, then apply at unusualpioneers.com. But enough of promotion from our end. Yes, applications are open. I want to hand over to Ritesh and to have a chat with Ritesh. While we are doing this, please do post your questions in the chat. We'll take note of them and then use them for Q&A later on. First of all, maybe I've later a bit about the track of the issue of education, the issue that EI is also addressing. And Ritesh is leading now the large-scale education program as an assistant vice president, also in charge of Mindspark. And in that capacity works with governments, foundations, CSR initiatives, civil society partners, so quite a broad range of partners. And before EI, he was an early member at an edtech startup, Covigenius. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, and heading their growth and partnerships work. Has also worked with Ashoka University already early on to develop the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy. And as I learned just recently, he is also from Darjeeling, which obviously is famous for its tea, but also in sight of the second highest peak on the planet, Kanchenjunga in northern India. So really, really excited to have you. You have a graduate degree in history from St. Stephen's College, the University of Delhi, Ritesh. So maybe starting with a bit of history, We would love to hear a bit more about your personal history, about your career path. How did you get to EI and to doing what you're doing today?
Yeah. Thank you, Dan, for such an illustrious welcome and giving us this forum for both to share my story as well as EI's story. Um, I'm really fortunate to be talking to all of you over this Zoom today. I come from a family where none of my parents, grandparents, cousins, uncles, none of them finished high school, and schooling was something which was really coveted in my family. Education is really aspirational in India, especially post independence, and it was something which was always there that you need to study, you need to go get a good education. I was very fortunate to study in some of the best institutions that India was there. I went to a school which was about 200 years old, founded by Jesuits. Went to St. Stephen's College, went to Ashoka University, and a lot of it was aided by philanthropic money. A lot of it was driven by scholarships and things like that. And that really made me think that there's so much education can do, and there's so much it has done for me in terms of both allowing me to have a broader worldview, in terms of having access to opportunity. I sense that there is a strong sense of pay it forward for me. And that's when I said to myself that I want to work in the sector. I want to work to improve equality of opportunity. In India, we've got a huge divide in terms of the haves and the have-nots. And I said that what can we do as we build the nation post 60 years of independence? And I felt education was one important, powerful driver. And that's when I was a hopeless romantic, straight out of college, felt that this is what I'm gonna do. Just change education. Didn't know how to teach a kid, didn't know how systems work. I thought I went to a school so I can change education. That's what my full romanticism of this idea was. Got to work for about 2 odd years working in some of the public schools in the slums of Bombay. Got to see the real hard reality of multi-grade classrooms. Parents coming from first generation learners, saw how school students were not coming to school because they had to fill water in the morning, or had to travel to a school which was almost 10 kilometers away. And that really opened the eye to what kind of systemic barriers are there present, which are causing these kind of challenges for equity of opportunity. And that's when I deep dived. I saw technology as an important driver. I thought technology and media can really provide solutions that can be scaled up, and then we are able to create a wide scale impact. And that's where my journey started. It all started with putting in pen drives on huge TVs and showing cartoons to kids so that they would come to school early, to all the way to then understanding what can be some of the high tech solutions that can really enable learning with understanding. So over the past decade or so, it's been a journey of going deeper into pedagogy, going deeper into systems, and also acknowledging what can be done and what's the agency I have to create some dent in the universe, and almost sort of fulfill my passion and my own sense that I can do this. So that's what it all started. I'm still a hopeless romantic. I completely align with my organization's vision of every child learning with understanding everywhere. I think I can do it. So does my organization, and that's what my that's what I would say. Some people call me delusional, but I think we can make it happen.
We would call you unusual pioneer and definitely passionate. So for sure, it's great to see somebody with so much enthusiasm in their job, and I would hope that everybody had that. And yeah, thanks for sharing. Maybe a bit of an overview, or maybe more concretely for the participants. What is the solution you're providing in digital education? Can you give a bit more of a details on this? I tried to outline it a little bit, but it's much better coming from you. What's the concrete solution, and why is this so much needed at the moment?
Correct. Thanks a lot, Dan, for asking that. So while India over the past three or decades has been trying to solve for the problem of access, which is that we need to build enough schools, we need to have enough teachers, so that ultimately everybody in India can go to a school and learn. However, for the past decade or so, we've been realizing that children are going to school but they're not learning. So children are going for 10 years into a building which is called a school, come out of it, and virtually they would have learned nothing on it. And what we've been focusing on in two things. One is on diagnostics, that is, how can we know what are children learning, why are they not learning, what are the barriers to not being able to, say, understand fractions or able to read a sentence, and what are those barriers. And so it's extreme diagnostic, really well curated questions and other kinds of methodologies and research to understand why are children learning, not learning. And that's one part of our deep research work that we do. Now, informed by that research, we came up with a learning solution called Mindspark. Now, what Mindspark does, it's at the intersection of data and pedagogy. It provides a technology-based learning solution through which it adapts and it personalizes and helps children master concepts with at least the bare minimum aim that a child can read in one language and can perform mathematical operations with conceptual clarity and mastery. So currently, that's the solution we offer. Happy to share more details as we move forward. In terms of the back end of it, whether it's from a AI and machine learning technology aspect, or in terms of the pedagogy of how it's sort of driven. So happy to take that up, Daniel, in the course
Yeah.
of the conversation.
We already have questions coming in from Vikas, for example, and we'll definitely pick that up. Maybe one thing, because you mentioned the role of philanthropy in your education early on, how important is it for you to actually look at EI as a business model and the initiatives that you're implementing versus having it run through philanthropy?
Correct. So then the way EI was structured, it's been a for-profit, private limited company for the past 20 odd years. The founders created with the vision that one, if we become an NGO, we'll be dependent on external funding, and it will sort of be driven by the mandates of that sort. If we become a research organization or a policy organization, we'll be doing less of practice and more of advocacy work. And if we become a pure play, only for-profit play, we'll be completely driven only by market dynamics. So the organization took a standpoint that we will be a for-profit sustainable organization, but a for impact, for purpose organization. And in that, from the beginning, the vision was something which was guiding all of it, which was children everywhere learning with understanding, no matter which curriculum they were following, no matter which school they were going. So in India, we reach out to some of the remotest schools in public schools in India, but some of the best schools in India as well. So almost reaching out to the bottom 10% or the last quartile at the same, the top quartile. The division which I lead, which is called the EI Siksha, or the Large Scale Education Program Division, works with a unique model. One, we use philanthropic funding and CSR funding, which is through corporates, as catalytic money, which can help in demonstrating impact, which can help in creating proof of concept, can really help in supporting process discovery. While we see the primary revenue channel and the primary impact channel to be working with the state directly, which is with the help of the taxpayers' money, what we're seeing is that if philanthropy can help in experimentation, in iterations, in designs, then ultimately the state can scale up. And that's where that's how our business model works. So currently we work with a host of philanthropists and foundations ranging from the Amazon to PNG, working with their CSRs, to Porticus and others we've worked in the past. We've really supported in pushing the boundaries of what we do and why we do it and how can we do it better. Whereas our partnerships with states have really helped us feel that if we are doing it well in 50 schools, how can we do it well in 50,000 schools? And that's the aspiration, and we want to realize in partnership with states.
Awesome. And I can imagine the scale, at least even in India, is going to be tricky just because of the diversity of the country, but you're also serving other countries. So also expanding it into other geographies. And Brad, for example, was also asking a question here, which we'll get to in a minute, about access to electricity as a key barrier for actually distribution of that kind of content. But we've seen a lot of companies scale too early and too quickly. How have you set that trajectory for yourself to reach so many people, so many students in such a short time, and so many diverse geographies?
Yeah, Daniel. So, I don't know what the market says we are growing slow, and I'm glad you're asking me that. Like how come you scale up so high? I still remember we met a Google executive and we shared with them that we are a large scale education program division, and they asked us how many schools do you do? We said 300, and they were like, "Is that large scale?" And I think that constantly, we ask ourselves. But to your question specifically. um we feel ourselves to be like a banyan tree. We've got deep roots in pedagogy research for the past 20 odd years. So the foundations set are very solid. We're very mission driven in terms of what we want to do. And all the work which we do is at the intersection of pedagogy, data, and technology. In terms of scaling, I think we've reached a point where we've been able to demonstrate impact. And we've been able to sort of find a method through which adoption is happening by state. So once we're able to sort of see whether this works, and in the case of Mindspark, we did it in private schools, we did it in few centers, we got a JPAL RCT done, we did it with 50 schools with philanthropic money in Rajasthan, and now today there are multiple states which are thinking of doing it at large scale in India. So our idea has been that let's do a proof of concept. Let's learn ourselves. Let's put it up for test to the world, which is to get in gold standard folks like JPAL or an ID Insight to come and test us whether this really works or does not work, and then demonstrate it at a significant scale so that we know where does the system break down. And I think today we are at a stage where we are ready for scale up. I wouldn't say that we've scaled up. There are just far too many schools and far too many kids who are going to school and not learning. So I think we still 0.2% of where we want to be. Hopefully, Daniel, when next year if we have this call, and I hope you say that you really have grown so fast. I think right now we're still in that stage where we're saying we want to grow.
All right. Well, that's some ambition. That's great to hear. And what about this issue of access to electricity that Brad, but also Vikas was alluding to?
Correct,
How-
correct. Yeah. So Dan, this has been the rudest shock which we got in India this time during the COVID times was exactly the problem of access. So while India has got a very powerful digital penetration and a revolution going on in terms of both internet and electricity, the COVID sort of really threw us that it is not as much as we perceive it to be. So while we were working with kids in schools, when we started working with them directly at home during the lockdown, we realized that children who go to public schools, only about 10% of them have a phone with them at their household, have a working internet connection. And I think the challenge is again in terms of how do you surpass those access boundaries. And I think we were discussing in a number of World Economic Forum meetings driven by the Delhi chapters in India in terms of how do you increase the access piece. And I think this one there is an intent from the state saying that we want to keep investing in infrastructure in terms of the electricity grid and the internet penetration. But I think the other thing is also for more and more schools to have ICT infrastructure. Currently, 10% of schools have ICT infrastructure in India. And I think the intent is to increase that. So there is a definite, uh, what we see as there is a strong segment which is excluded. And the sad part is for the past 1.5 years, children have not gone to school. And the children who have not gone to school, the people who can afford it, have got a net tech solution, have got a phone, have got a tutor, a live streaming class. But children who come from government schools actually have had the biggest learning loss. And estimates say that this loss might be really, really detrimental. So there's a lot of work to be done for when schools start reopening.
In your mind, is that that impact, that scarring on the education, is that recoverable, or is that what some would call a lost generation?
So then, it might be controversial, but our outcome numbers were very bad. So they were very bad. So, when India participated in PISA last, conducted by the OECD, we stood second last in it. There's an independent survey, which is the ASER survey, says that on an average, 60 to 70% of kids in grade five can't do addition, can't read a sentence. So the baseline itself was so low. How worse can it get if it's there? Now, definitely, there can be a systematic, way which we can address the bridge as the schools open. Um, I am hopeful that it's not a lost generation. I think we can cover up. But I think the scene before COVID was already bad. It's not that it could have got far worse than now. So that's what my understanding and take is on this. Um, the challenge which we're seeing can be of different folds. One, what we're seeing is, will children come back to schools? A lot of children in secondary education have got married. A lot of girls have been dropped off from affordable private schools to uh, now whether they'll come back to the school or not. So these are some of the challenges we are foreseeing. But we also realize that the parents have realized that schooling is important. So I think it's again, it's out there in the open on what these real answers. And I think we've just started with school openings now, and we'll get to see. I'm hopeful it will not be a lost generation though.
Well, that's great to hear. That's good to hear. And since you mentioned it, that there is a obvious gender gap in education, have you seen technology like yours being able to actually bridge that gap?
Yeah. So I would say not only gender gap. There's in India, we've also got the caste gap in terms of the caste system there. And what we've seen is, because technology does not sort of discriminate in terms of who, like when you log into Mindspark, the software does not know whether it's a boy or a girl, or it's a high caste person or a low caste person. The child can engage with the software to learn. However, in some of the classrooms, we see this happening, that there is some sort of discrimination, some biases which creep in. So a teacher might not engage with the girl so much, might not engage with someone from a lower caste so much. And what we've seen is that because Mindspark does not do that, we've seen children flourishing. And I've had one of the most touching moments in my journey with AI for the past 3 years. I was in a school in Lucknow, and this teacher came to me and started crying. And I said, "Sir, what happened?" And this teacher told me that this child who's in grade 5, I had never engaged with this child. And today, and in this week, this child raised her hand inside the classroom and asked me a question. And I was like, but what's so new in it? Because I thought this child knows nothing and can never learn. But because of the Mindspark program, the child was learning, and then eventually had the courage to ask a question. I said that just changed the thing for me. So in some ways, because technology does not have that sort of bias in many ways, and because our software is such, it's not passive, it's active in the sense children need to engage on it. We've seen children who've been sort of marked up by either their parents or their teachers. When they start learning, there's some magic which happens with the teachers, and there's a lot of epiphanies happening, and it's really touching to see some of that on the ground.
That's so incredible to hear. And obviously, when you tell those stories, it's almost within those stories that the impact is already quite significant. Can you give us a feeling, though, in addition to those stories as well, what is the efficacy, what is the outcomes that students are able to achieve through Mindspark or other programs?
Right. So then we had, the JPAL conducted an RCT on Mindspark, and this was conducted in Delhi, and then a paper was published in the American Institute of Economic Review, where we saw that children who were using Mindspark as compared to the control group were learning double in math and more than double in language. And this was almost in a short amount of time, as less as 6 months. And this was not only for children who were lagging behind, but the entire profile of children inside a classroom. So these were some of the largest effects that were seen in a cost-effective manner, and the trends sort of continue across our different studies. And I'm happy to share the link of the study. It was um, researched by Professor Karthik Muralidharan and others at JPAL, and that was something which was interesting to see, because before this, a lot of technology interventions in education were written off. So a lot of them are more driven with the idea that let's give devices and the children are going to learn. However, what Mindspark was able to demonstrate, that just giving devices is not going to help. What you also need to think about is the software inside it, and how is that sort of really driven and made for learning.
Yeah, I guess the one laptop per child initiative really showed that you can't just throw hardware at the problem.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And Obviously, in the last 20 years, there was a lot of good, and there was probably also a lot of painful learning along the way. Can you share some of the war stories that happened, and maybe some ideas where other entrepreneurs can also pull some inspiration from in the way that you set up the products and learned as you grew?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the like some at an implementation level, and we're talking about an edtech solution all the way in 2010, and I still remember that these were we took devices at on the ground, and there were teachers who have seen tablets and who have said that we'll get an electric shock if we click on this. Children who've been taught how to scroll, and of course all of these things we take it for granted now with the digital revolution of WhatsApp and Facebook and other things, but we're talking about a time when all of this was so novel, and that was really from a user perspective. We've always had teachers who said that how can a computer teach a child, how can a computer help in learning, and to see that transformation as like again working with them for them to see how it works is just magical. In terms of if because we did this like in terms of very early on, we went to the government and asked them that we want to work with you, and they were like, show us the evidence. We showed them the evidence. They said, okay, we'll put in all the hardware, let's get working, and let's take out a tender for this. And we were the only people who were doing personalized adaptive learning. So within the government procurement norms, you at least need to have three players to apply for a contract, to at least for a competitive bid to take place. And that was the time when we only existed, so the tender was scrapped off. Today, of course, we have an ecosystem which is thriving, and we've got multiple personalized adaptive learning platforms. But at that stage, we were the only one. So that was pretty sad to see, and that's where we realized that the ecosystem has a very very big role to play. So those are some of the stories. Of course, there are countless many more, all the way from working on some of the hottest climates in India. So we work in a place in Churu which reaches about 52 degrees in summers, 52 degrees Celsius, and so you almost have keyboards melting, to all the way to places where it's super cold in Himachal Pradesh, to places which are affected by civil issues in India, where it takes like almost going by an aeroplane, train, and then kacha roads to reach the school. So there are countless of them of these stories of how and I think there are many more to sort of live right now, but yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, we'll get to, let's say, your top 3 tips for other entrepreneurs at the end of the conversation as well. And while I think you answered Judy's question on who's actually the payer, which is the public school system in your case, maybe over to Paulina, because we have a few questions that we would like to share and ask even before we break into networking. Paulina, what are the key questions here?
Hello, everyone. I'm Paulina. I'm also working for the Unusual Pioneers program. I'm here to collect some of your questions. Feel free to drop more of them in the chat. We will come back to them later. Or if you have something that's burning on your mind now, feel free to let me know. We hope we can address them all. So a lot of the questions that came in, we already addressed during the talk, how you work with the bottom of the pyramid, loss of electricity, and funding. Another question, maybe we can talk a little bit more, how is work with the teachers, the people on the ground when you come to a school? How does that usually, are they more welcoming, or do they feel threatened by the technology you bring in?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is, and again, because the past decade has just been phenomenal for India in terms of its technology revolution, like for everyone else in the world, because of just the massive surge in smartphone access and the kind of apps that have come in. But ideally, what we see in a school today, if you come when we start a program or things like that, is basically there's a whole spectrum. So there are people who are tech savvy, so they are like really excited with devices, with the software, with machine learning. So they really want to know about it, and I think that's about 10 to 20%. Then there are 30% of teachers who are like, we're going to retire in 1 year. Don't you dare bring anything new, and don't you dare tell us anything to do. So that's the part who are like, okay, you want to do anything, you do it, but don't involve us at all. And then in the middle, there's this huge chunk who are like skeptical, because they've seen many programs coming on, failing. And for them, it's like, okay, that's the litmus test to pass. And so for us, while we do our capacity building, hand holding, because none of our programs are designed in a way which we do that we're going to be there forever with the schools. So we do something called a gradual responsibility model, which is basically from one of the teachers we learned the phrase that, I do, we do, and then you do, which is, I'm going to do it, I'm going to help you really run this lab, I'll have my person on the ground, whatever support you need, that person's there, then we'll do it together. So my person will come once in a week to you, we really problem solve, and then we'll just move everything virtual, and then you can call us for any support. Now this happens over a period of time, and that's really worked for us. So it's not like we throw devices, we throw the software, train the teachers in one day and then go away. We do like this gradual release of responsibility kind of a model, and over a period of time we see greater adoption. What we also see is what are the problems teachers are facing and can Mindspark help them. And one of them is simply assessments, right? So teachers need to grade, teachers need to know where the children is, but for our software this happens automatically. So we've been really helped to automate a lot of that, give them that data so they don't need to do that in their classroom. A lot of time teachers face problems in doing small group tutoring. So because Mindspark's doing that at every child's level, we're able to solve a big problem. So again, finding those points, we're still, tackling some of the behavioral points. Like just to share one story, I was in Rajasthan and the teacher shared with me the Mindspark lab doesn't have a blackboard. Your Mindspark lab, all the children are facing the computer, which is facing the wall. This is really strange to me. How can children learn like this? Because when the blackboard and the chalk is my tool. You've taken that away from me in your Mindspark lab. The children are not looking at me; they're looking at the computer screen. So I feel very helpless when I come to your Mindspark lab. Now these are challenges which some of the teachers have shared with me. That how can you really solve for this? So we've thought of and we've tried that. Can the children face towards a center? Like, can we have a circle instead of facing the walls? Can we have like a blackboard for the teacher? Can we create better reports for the teacher and things like that? So that's more iterative in terms of what we can do, but there's a long way to go. That's the heavy part where what we are now solving for is how does both Mindspark help the child, but to a great extent also help the teacher build their instructional leadership, which is what they do in the traditional chalk and duster method.
Thank you for that answer. It's always great to hear one of the stories on the ground as well to get a bit more of an idea what's actually happening. One more question that I think is complementary to that that Judy just asked is how much of the curriculum does Mindspark cover, and is it more of a complementary tool for teachers to use, or is there also like a complete curriculum in it?
Yeah, it's a complete curriculum and across different countries. So it's almost like Lego blocks. We adapt and cater to all the skills which major curriculums have to offer. So it covers grades 1 to 9 and focuses mainly on two things, which is language, and again language in 10 languages in India. So we have 10 languages which we offer in India, and math, which is the two most focus areas. We're experimenting and trying to find how do we do science, because that has its own pedagogy and its own method of doing it. What we've been able to crack fairly well is language and math right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this, which gets us to an exciting part of the session, which is actually networking. For those of you who are not prepared to network, you can just, as I mentioned initially, just stay here in the room, and we'll get back to actually a few final questions for Ritesh in 5 to 10 minutes. But so far already, thanks a lot, Ritesh, for sharing those insights. I think it made it very, very tangible on what you're doing and the great work you're doing in the different countries, specifically India, of course. We'll break you out into breakouts in a second. What you can do and what we want you to do there is just to introduce yourself very quickly to the other, what your interest in social entrepreneurship is, and then you can have a conversation about the topic we just heard about, and also the questions that you may want to ask Ritesh when we get back to the plenary. It's your opportunity to meet, as I mentioned, other people. As we also have participants that are staying in the plenary, you may be allocated to a breakout room that only has one person. Then we will work on that. So wait a minute or two and we'll push other people into your room. So you always have somebody to talk to. But yeah, with that, really, let's take 5 to 10 minutes, enjoy a bit of conversations, and then we'll be back in 10 to the hour. See you in a second. We have to give our AI lady that is telling us when the recording starts a little name too. Maybe Siri Junior or whatever it is. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good time chatting to each other. You still have 10 minutes to exchange contact details via chat, a direct message I would recommend. Otherwise, if somebody wants to be emailed by the entire group, then feel free to also chat and share it on the entire chat. But would love to hear maybe 1 or 2 thoughts from the groups when everybody's back. I think we still have a couple in the breakouts, or no, we should be good, right? Rooms should be closed, right, Paulina? Yeah, all right. So maybe if 1 or 2 reflections, and then specifically, obviously, questions also to Ritesh from the group would be great. Is there any volunteers that want to talk a bit about what they have discussed and the questions that they wanted to bring up? Otherwise, we'll jump right back into the conversation with Ritesh.
I had a question. Maybe I missed it, but first of all, thank you so much, Daniel and Ritesh, for this wonderful session. It's such an inspiring story, and education, anything in education is only a plus. So in the chat, I think because Malhotra asked this question about how do teachers in the government schools react to the product, and in general, how is the reaction and the support from the government to these kind of initiatives? Is it more accepted, or is it a little bit tight with getting support from the government? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. So Shweta, I think I answered the teachers part, but in short, I think there are some teachers who love the product and program, are willing to engage with it. There's some who are like, don't touch us, we want to retire, we don't want to play with technology. This program came, the other program will also come. And there are some who are skeptical, but are the ones who can also be converted with evidence on the ground, demonstration on the ground. So that's from a teacher perspective. I think from a state perspective, I think we are at a very, very interesting moment in history for India, especially. And I think the state has been very, very open on exploring solutions. Now, what the state does not have is a lot of insight and education of how it works. So when you talk to them about edtech, for them it is like, okay, let's get hardware for all the schools, and that's the line of thinking. So there has been a lot of education, both in terms of what kind of hardware should be there, and second, how do you design programs that can be effective. So moving away from inputs to outputs, and eventually I hope India starts having a lot of social impact bonds in the future, I think has been one of the movements. And I think with COVID, we've seen accelerated adoption. We've seen accelerated appetite for digital transformation. So in that way, I think, yeah, the days are sunny ahead. I know Dan was waiting for the sun. Yeah, the days are sunny ahead for ICT in India.
That's really great to see where it's going. Really good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And maybe Ritesh, from my end, the question that I already alluded to earlier in the conversation is, what are the top 3 things that you would give people that are just at the beginning of their journey to start this journey, that basically to follow your passion and follow apparently the reason why you're here on this earth? At least it sounds a bit like that's what you're doing. What are your top 3?
Yeah, I think slight idealism is helpful. I think we live in quite cynical times when you look at news, when you look at, you know, like I I find it weird when I hear people say I'm just a cog in the wall, a cog in the wheel, I think there's a lot of agency we have as individuals while we work in organizations, while we want to change things. I think there's a lot of power in agency. So I would say like that's something which all of us can do. That's something which I want to do. I'm doing it. I feel powerful enough to do it, and I feel that I have the agency to create a change. So that belief and hope as an entrepreneur also is something that really helps me do what I want to do. That's, I would say, is number one tip. I think number two is don't drink the Kool-Aid. Like what's important is the destination, which is in terms of, at least for education, we're looking at children learning. And so sometimes it's a particular technology, you get too married to saying that, okay, teacher training will work, let's just do that, or this theory of change is the best. I think that really sort of blocks evolution of thinking what is cutting edge, how can you move forward. I think that's the second thing. So really laser sharp focus on what's the final outcome, and really just moving towards that, so you don't get caught up with a particular model or a particular product, but rather it's almost like an evolution of your thinking, of your product, of your journey into that. That's, I think, is the second thing. And third thing, and this is something which I've learned from the Unusual Pioneers, um, I think, is also taking care of yourself. It's very, very important to be, to sort of invest in your resilience, to invest in how can you sustain yourself, both physically, mentally, emotionally, for the long run. Like, these are wicked problems. These are really challenging problems. It's not something which can be done when you're tired, when you are broken. And I think these are investments which are very, very apt and important as you move in your entrepreneurship journey. So these are the three big takeaways, is what I would say.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ritesh. And then maybe last, because I know we have so many people from different geographies here also on the call, and I already see the applauses. That's great. But last question then, if somebody does want to bring EI and your solutions to another country, another region, what are the next steps, and where can they reach you?
Yeah. So, I'll drop in my email ID for sure for anyone to reach out, and we will love to collaborate and partner. Uh, we've got a website called ei-india.com, and that's where a lot of work has been showcased, and you can see a lot about the work. You can type educational initiatives, Mindspark on Google, and you'll get a lot of the research and the work which we have done. In terms of new geographies, and in terms of the way we are adopting it for some of the markets is like a reseller market, or a distributor-led market, where we will not have our teams on the ground there, but rather have local domiciles run that entire sort of territory divisions, especially in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Far East. Today, if your country primary language is English, then that's something which we'd love to sort of engage with you, work with you on bringing our solutions to that market. For other languages, whether it's Spanish, whether it's French, that's something we're still working on. But in case if there's an interest in doing something new, impactful, experimenting with it, we'd love to also explore that. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm available as Ritesh Agarwal there. You'll be able to find me there as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ritesh. It was great to speak with you, and thanks so much for your important work at Educational Initiatives. And kudos to the entire team for what you've achieved so far. Thanks for your time today. I'll close the session with a bit of hints and assignments on what's coming up. Conversations like the one with Ritesh are available on the Unusual Talk podcast, but there's also new content coming in that is not in the Unusual Talks, because we can't squeeze all of the great work into just one event format. So there will be, for example, since we're talking about Spanish, there will be a conversation coming up with a Spanish company, a Colombian company actually, working on access to livelihoods for smallholder farmers in Colombia. And we just released a conversation with Salah at MasterCard last week. So definitely take a look. It's available on any common podcast platform. And you can have a chance to learn more about that. And as of the next Unusual Talk, we have one coming up on November 11th, same time, with Godwin Bamza at Unilever, He's driving the Shakti program, specifically in Nigeria, to allow for women empowerment in rural areas. A very, very exciting and interesting conversation. Encourage you to join at that point. Just follow us on LinkedIn for these events and these updates, and we'll keep you in the loop. With that, thanks so much. Thanks for also taking the time to network with others and staying on. We'll see you in the next opportunity. Have a good one. Stay unusual, and all the best for you, Ritesh, and for your work. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.